Coming up today, the head of Korea's central bank says the Fed's recent decision to hike rates does not automatically mean Korea will follow suit. The smog is refusing to shift. A high level of air pollution continues to straddle most of Korea, but skies are forecast to clear by Thursday afternoon. Plus, astonishing scenes in China as a survivor is rescued 67 hours after being trapped by a landslide in Shenzhen. Over 70 people remain missing. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 23rd of December. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. And we start with those comments made by Korea's top central banker. Lee Ju-yeol says the recent rate hike in the US won't necessarily prompt Korea to make any adjustments of its own. He says while the Fed's lift-off decision is important, it's just one of many factors to be considered. Kim Min-ji starts us off.
There will be no immediate raise in Korea's interest rates. That's according to Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol, who says the recent rate hike in the U.S. is just one of many factors the institution needs to take into account when considering adjustments to Korea's rate policy. Last week, the U.S. Federal Reserve raised rates by 1/4 percentage point, lifting it into the range of 0.25 to 0.5%. He said although the global financial market is showing signs of stability, a normalization in U.S. monetary policy will likely impact the flow of capital as well as exchange rate fluctuations. Some analysts have said that Korea's central bank must raise its own rates to prevent a capital outflow. However, the top central banker has said on previous occasions the Fed's rate hike isn't necessarily a cause for concern at this time, mainly as the move was widely expected and the pace of the increase will be gradual. He said the central bank will consider the current macroeconomic situation as well as local conditions when deciding whether to adjust Korea's key rate. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now to some news Korea has been waiting more than 7 months to hear. Health authorities will call a formal end to the MERS outbreak when the clock hits midnight tonight. Korea's health ministry says it is following World Health Organization guidelines under which a country can declare an end to an outbreak of Middle East respiratory syndrome 4 weeks after the last patient either fully recovers or dies. 28 days is double the maximum incubation period for MERS. Korea's final MERS patient died on November 25th. The first case of the deadly virus was confirmed in Korea on May 20th. It infected 187 people, killing 38. President Park Geunhye has been chairing a meeting on the progress of her administration's key reform tasks. The president received reports this morning on how the 24 tasks spread across the sectors of labor, public, finance and economic innovation were carried out. Now, these goals were laid out at the start of the year. President Park noted the several achievements made, such as the restructuring of pension plans for public workers and the completion of a nationwide network of innovation centers aimed at supporting startups. She once again called on lawmakers to pass a slew of pending economic reform bills so the government's tasks get a boost and bear fruit faster. Now, as you can see behind me, skies over Korea remain tinged with a grey-brownish haze this afternoon as large parts of the country continue to suffer under some of the worst air pollution seen this year. Even higher concentrations of pollution and fine dust particles from China are forecast from later today as well, so it is advisable that you wear a mask if heading outside and refrain from strenuous exercise. The National Institute of Environmental Research says the Seoul metropolitan area, Chungcheong, North Jeolla and North Gyeongsang regions in particular are going to see high levels of fine dust throughout this Wednesday. Fortunately, though, experts say skies should clear from late Thursday afternoon as a band of cold air sweeps the nation. Volkswagen Korea has issued a recall for almost 28,000 cars because of a mechanical defect that could prevent airbags from deploying during an accident. Korea's Transport Ministry said Wednesday that the problem is with the steering wheel clock spring, which could tear an electrical cable connecting the driver's front airbag. The defect can also cause the vehicle's horn to malfunction. Now, 8 models made between 2010 and 2014 are affected, including the Passat, Tiguan and the Golf. Another 1,200 Passat cars are also being recalled due to a software bug that is affecting engine and braking performance. We must stress, however, that these recalls are unrelated to the emissions rigging scandal that rocked the German automaker earlier this year. Recalls for that issue will begin sometime next year on 125,000 cars in Korea alone. Now, a survivor has been rescued 67 hours after the landslide that collapsed an industrial estate in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen on Sunday. China's Xinhua news agency is reporting that the 19-year-old man was found at around 3:30 a.m. local time on Wednesday and freed from the rubble 3 hours later. You're looking at video from the scene there. He was conscious, but his legs had unfortunately been crushed. Now, he's the only survivor to have been found so far. Another body was discovered close by, only the second death to be confirmed thus far. More than 70 people are still missing after 33 buildings were destroyed by this landslide, a mix of mud and construction waste from a man-made dump site that became unstable and collapsed after heavy rains. A record number of refugees have poured into the European Union this year, especially from war-torn Syria. And with the number of asylum seekers expected to be even bigger next year, member countries are struggling to cope. Now, Son Jung-in has this report.
According to a joint statement released by the UN Refugee Agency and the International Organization for Migration, more than 1 million refugees have entered the European Union so far this year, either by land or sea. The figure is a 4-fold increase from last year, largely driven by Syrians fleeing the civil war in their home country. Amid the worsening crisis, the UN Security Council unanimously passed a resolution Tuesday demanding Syrian authorities immediately open up access routes for humanitarian aid. Of more than 13.5 million people in need of food and medical assistance in Syria, the Council said nearly 400,000 people are trapped in besieged areas, unable to receive aid. Calls are growing for a massive resettlement of hundreds of thousands of Syrian and other refugees in the EU. However, there are concerns as member countries are already overwhelmed with the situation. Germany, which received the highest number of asylum applications in the EU, has seen a surge in crimes committed against refugees. According to the country's Interior Ministry, more than 1,600 offenses have been reported this year, including physical and verbal attacks and property damage. The figure is almost double the number from last year. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, staying in Europe, and French security authorities have foiled an attack on police and the armed forces in the central city of Orleans. France's Interior Minister said Tuesday that 2 French nationals, aged 20 and 24, were arrested last Saturday in connection to the alleged plot. The minister added that both men are believed to have been in contact with another French national currently thought to be in Syria. He did not elaborate on what kind of attack the suspects were planning. The arrest comes some 6 weeks after gunmen from the so-called Islamic State group murdered 130 people in Paris. The minister added that security forces in France have foiled 10 terror plots this year alone. Iraqi security forces have advanced into the western city of Ramadi for a final push to retake and hold the city they lost to the Islamic State group back in May. According to officials in Baghdad, the government troops went into the center of the city from several fronts and began purging residential areas. On Sunday, Iraqi planes dropped leaflets urging civilians to get out of the city within 72 hours, warning of an impending operation. Iraqi forces have been backed by US-led coalition airstrikes and also supported by the police, the army and Sunni tribes opposed to the jihadists. Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner in the race to be the next U.S. president, has sparked yet more controversy, this time by using a vulgar term to describe Hillary Clinton. Speaking at a rally in Michigan on Tuesday local time, the billionaire real estate mogul said Clinton was, quote, schlonged by President Obama in the 2008 race for the Democratic nomination. Now, schlong is a Yiddish slang term for a man's private parts. Trump also taunted Clinton over her bathroom break at last Saturday's Democratic debate. He repeatedly asked the crowd where Clinton had gone before grimacing and saying he knew where she went and that it was disgusting. Clinton's campaign team said it urged Americans to denounce Trump for his sexist and belittling remarks. India has approved amendments to the country's juvenile law to allow suspects between the ages of 16 and 18 to be tried as adults for serious crimes. Under the new law, teenage offenders will be sentenced to at least 7 years in a young offenders institution if convicted of heinous crimes such as rape or murder. However, they will not face the death penalty or life imprisonment. The amendments were passed by India's upper house of parliament on Tuesday following a vote in the lower house back in May. The law changes come after the recent release of a minor convicted in a fatal gang rape. There was public outrage when the perpetrator walked free after only serving 3 years in prison, which is actually the maximum penalty because he was a few months away from turning 18 at the time. The new bill needs to be signed by the president before taking effect. Korea's Constitutional Court is set to rule on the constitutionality of a decades-old treaty between Korea and Japan regarding compensation for Korean victims forced into labor during Japan's colonial rule. The case has drawn a lot of attention in both countries as the decision could impact Seoul-Tokyo ties. Gwon-soa has this report.
Complainant Lee Yun-jae, whose father died due to forced labor for Japanese companies during Japan's 1910 to 1945 colonial rule of Korea, filed the case 6 years ago in November 2009, saying that a 1965 treaty between Korea and Japan is unconstitutional. Korea's Constitutional Court is expected to issue its verdict in the case on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Korea time. At issue is whether Article 1, Clause 2 of the treaty, the Korea-Japan Claim Settlement Agreement, violates the property, rights and interests of individuals. If the court rules in E's favor, Japanese companies will be responsible for compensating individuals who are forced to work for them during the colonial period. Tokyo claims the issue was settled by the 1965 treaty, a point made again by Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida on Tuesday when he said he would be keeping a close eye on the ruling, although without making a prediction about the outcome.
I think for now it is very hard to predict what the outcome will be from the court. But I do think that it will have some impact on the Korea-Japan relationship because it may guide to rewrite the basic treaty between two countries.
The ruling is receiving extra attention because this year marks the 50th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic ties between the two countries, whose relations since then have been repeatedly strained by historical and territorial issues. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
Now, a full moon will light up the sky on Christmas Day for the first time in 38 years, but it's not the only celestial event happening this holiday season. For more on the other astronomical gifts that will await us this week, Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The prospects for a white Christmas in Korea this year are pretty slim, but there will be a lot of celestial magic to appreciate this holiday season. If you look at the night sky on Christmas Day, you'll see the last full moon of the year and the first on the holiday since 1977.
The cycle of a full moon is about 29.5 days. We call the full moon a lucky moon if the cycle coincides with Christmas. The next lucky moon won't appear until 2034.
The moon will be at its brightest at around 8 p.m. in Korea and should be visible with the naked eye. The second celestial event of the season will arrive just before that in the form of a giant asteroid about 2 kilometers long that will zoom past Earth on Christmas Eve. U.S. space agency NASA says the asteroid's flight path will be about 27 million kilometers away. That's more than 28 times the distance between the Earth and the Moon, so it doesn't pose a threat. However, the asteroid will be close enough for radar observations on Earth and is large enough to be visited by manned space missions. In order to see it, though, you might wish for the gift of an astronomical telescope under the tree. Kim Jung, Arirang News.
Now, hailing a taxi in Seoul on a Friday or Saturday night can be pretty hard going, but it can be even more frustrating over Christmas or on New Year's Eve. Fortunately for all the revelers out there, the Seoul city government has taken heed of complaints and agreed to let cab companies operate more cars over the festive period. Under the deal reached Wednesday, an extra 17,000 taxis will be on the city streets between midnight and 4 a.m. during the peak times of the holiday season. It can be hard for people to get home as Seoul only has a limited night bus service and the subway closes overnight. Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.